Hello and welcome to this tutorial where we're going to have a look at creating a furnace in Crayta. So if you didn't catch it, Russ, Ed and Adam made a game called The Machine on live stream, and in that game your job was to scavenge for items in the game world and feed them to a machine. If the machine ever runs out of fuel, then that's game over. And so I'm going to take a little bit of inspiration from that and just work on a small part of that game mechanic, which is the part where you feed a thing, and if it runs out for a certain amount of time, then it's game over. And so essentially we've got a fire raging, and what I want to do is give it an item from my inventory, and it should either start the fire or keep the fire going. And eventually, if it's been a certain amount of time and I haven't given it any more fuel, then the fire should go out. And I'll add a couple of events into that as well, so that I can hook it up into other parts of different games. For example, if we had an on fire stop event, then when the fire runs out, then that event could be hooked into other things, maybe even a game controller and end the game for a team or something like that. I don't know. So I'm hoping to just take that small concept of keeping something alight and make it accessible so that you can add it into whatever game you want to. So we're going to do a little bit of scripting in this. So you're going to need to use advanced mode for that. And I'm starting this tutorial kind of off the back of the luck machine tutorial, where we've got an inventory system in place. And that's quite important. How you pick things up and what things you have in your inventory isn't super important as long as it's possible in your game before you get to this point, because we need to be able to feed the fire things from our inventory. So that's going to be a part of this too. Okay, let's get into it then. So I want to interact with this hole in the wall over here, and then when I interact with it, I want it to start a fire. So the thing about interacting with a hole in the wall is that when you interact with something, it's whatever's under your crosshair. And so actually it won't interact with the hole in the wall, it will interact with this wall behind the hole in the wall. So what we need to do is fill the hole in the wall with something invisible that we can use in order to capture that on interact event. And I've already done that. So if I click on this fire mesh here, which is a child of the furnace opening, and click visible, it's an aircon unit. So we're interacting with an aircon unit, but I've made it invisible. So behind the scenes, there's an aircon unit in the middle of this hole. And what I want to do is when I interact with that, start some of these effects. Now, if I highlight all of the effects at once, you can see what they look like. So there's a bunch of fire in there, there's smoke, and there's smoke coming out the top. So I could make it so that I interact and then click through each one of these things or turn each one of these things on. But I think that there's a smarter way to do that using some loops. So we'll use some iteration in order to make our lives easy. But first, let's add a way to interact with this fire. So we have our aircon unit and it's invisible. And I'm going to, with that aircon unit that I've renamed fire, I'm going to click entity, add script, new script. And this is going to be called my fire script. Okay, and then let's open that script up for editing. So when I interact with this, I want to do something. I want to turn on lots of effects. Well, in order to do that, we're going to need something to store those effects. So let's create an array as a property. And this is going to be called fire effects. The type is going to be entity, because these effects here, smoke chimney 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fire extra large, these are all entities. Even though they are effects, they're also there because they're live in my game environment, they're actually entities. So the type is entity. I'm going to put is equals effect asset, and that's the type of entity it is. So I won't be able to add, I don't know, lights or players or whatever to this. There can only be effects. Is equals effect asset. Container equals array. So that's saying that there can be lots of things in this one thing. And that will do for now, although you should probably add a tooltip as well. And if I save that It should appear down here, but it hasn't. I think it's this. Maybe this needs to be effect. Yeah, that should be effect, not effect asset. Okay, so is equals effect. And now we can see that it has appeared down here, fire effects. And it's an empty array. And that's fine. I'm going to add all of these to it in a minute. But first, let's write the functionality. So function, fire script. And this is going to be a function that's called when you interact with that aircon unit. And the function is going to be called add fuel. Okay, so here it's going to pass a player, and we'll get to that in a minute. But for now, add fuel, and what we want to do is loop through these effects and turn them all on. So for I equals 1 hash self.properties.fire effects. So do end. So that's how we write our for loop. And it basically means I is a new variable we're creating, and it starts at 1 and it runs up to however many things there are in our fire effects array. So if there are 0 things, I will start at 1 and it won't run. If there is 1 thing, I will start at 1 and it will run until I is 1, so it will run once. If there are 50 things, I will start at 1 and it will count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 50. And it will do that 50 times. It will do this, whatever's in between this do and end, it will do 50 times, or however many times there are of our fire effects. And so what we want to do is literally just turn each fire effect on at each position. So self.properties.fire effects. And the way we get hold of each thing is open square bracket, I close square bracket. So this will be an index. So we use I to refer to an index, and this will essentially count up each thing within our array. And now we can do something with this. So .active equals true. So that's literally going through every item in our array and turn its active status to true. Remember, in our array, they are all effects. They are all entities that are of type effect. So now that I've done that bit of functionality, let's add some fire effects. So I'm going to click the plus in our fire effect array down here, and then I can just drag in things I want to. So this fire extra large. And actually there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different effects. So I just need to keep adding plus until we've got 9 things, and then I just drag each of those things into there. Like this. There's all the smokes. 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The explosion debris I don't actually want to include in this. I'm going to do that a different way. So I'm just going to delete that element by right-clicking and then selecting delete element. Okay, so this add fuel function. Let's make sure that that occurs when we interact with this aircon unit, this fire here. So I'm going to click the plus on the on interact with that fire selected. And notice immediately it's saying, oh, there's an error. Asset property must be set. And it's because I haven't set this binding here. So to do that, I'm just going to drag the fire on into that slot. An alternative way to do that would be to click on this drop down and then find the fire in this way. So we can do it that way as well. The script that we want to affect is the fire script. There's only one script attached to our fire, and it's called fire script. So it should pre-fill automatically unless you've got other scripts attached to yours. And the event we want to fire is the add fuel event. There we go. So now when I interact, it will run this, interact with this invisible aircon unit. It will run this chunk of code here. This chunk of code here has a for loop in it and essentially counts through each item in our fire effects array all the way up to 8, and it turns them all to active. Now if I run that at the moment, it's not actually going to do anything because they are all already active. So there are a couple of things I could do here. One would be to turn off active on each of these effects, but a better way to do that might be to actually turn off the fire effects by saying stop fire, like that, and essentially do this same for loop, copy that, but instead of active equal true, make active equal false, and then run the stop fire function when the game starts on the init function. So this init function is called when the game first starts, and now when the game starts it calls this, which calls this. So this block of code runs here, and we loop through all of the fire effects in that array, and we set them all to not active. We set all of their active statuses to false. Let's go and see what happens. So now when I press F5, we can see there's no effects. Well, there's a little bit of chimney smoke at the top. I think I missed that one. Let's add that before we go any further. Okay, the chimney smoke at the top. Where's that? Let's just put in chimney. Have I got all 5 chimney smokes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Furnace chimney smoke. You're not in my list. There we go. Add you as well. That must be the last one. I can find that out just by going to the game, clicking on the effect, and then we can see that that is that effect. So now, and that's the power of the kind of the loop way of doing it, is that adding another effect to manage is simple. You just then click the plus and find the effect. Okay, so all of the effects are now turned off. And when I walk up to this hole in the wall and I interact, they all turn on. There we go. So that's essentially me starting that fire. Now, along with that, we kind of need to do, we need to turn on these sounds. So they're both active, set to false to start with. Let's turn them on and stop fire. Let's add our sound effects here. Name equals sound effects. Type is entity, and this is really similar to the effect group. Is equals sound container equals array, like that. And then essentially we're just going to go through the sound effects and turn them to active. And the same again, turn them to not active here. So we're now doing it with fire and we're doing it with sounds. And if I save that, we can see I've got this sound effect array. So let's add a couple of elements there. Let's add that one and add that one. So test the game, run up to the fire, interact. Here we go. So now we've got sounds and we've got effects. But it doesn't really feel like we've fed the fire something because we're doing it without anything in our inventory, nothing in our hands. I can get something from my inventory by pulling this lever. This is from the luck machine tutorial. And then grab the rubber duck. So now I have the rubber duck and I want to basically interact with this fire, add some more fuel, and take the rubber duck out of my hands. Well, it's called a sandwich in the inventory for some reason, but yeah, that's okay. We can leave it like that. Okay, so interact with the fire and take something out of my hands. So the way we do that is when we add fuel, that's done when we interact with the fire. So when we walk up to the fire and interact with it, it runs this add fuel function. And actually, when you run a function from an interact event, it always gets past the player who interacted with the thing. It gets past that, and we can capture the player by writing player in here. And now, because we wrote it in between these brackets, essentially, when you interact with the fire, the player's character gets stored in this player here. And so we can use that to get hold of their user inventory and remove something from it. So here we can do player get user, and that gets hold of, so the player is this, template, and the user is this template. The player is the character that's running around the game world, and the user is the person, is kind of the model of the person who's sitting playing the game and has their UI and all sorts of stuff like that. And so the user has the inventory, and let's have a quick look at the inventory script. So in here, we've got remove from item, and we've got remove template, and we've got remove current. So this remove current is what we're going to be hooking into. And that's whatever the player is holding. Whatever the player is holding gets removed, and we just pass how many of those things we need to remove. So player get user, and then we can actually do dot inventory script, and then remove current. We want to remove one of those things. So let's try that out. So I'm going to pull on this lever, get the rubber duck. Oh, it's a flower this time. And then run over here and essentially start the fire with the flower. So that's a basic idea of getting an item and putting it on the fire. You just remove it from the player's inventory and start a load of effects and sounds to make it feel like a fire's going. Okay, so we've got those bits started. Now, what if I didn't have something in my inventory? So when you're programming or coding something, it's always good to test in the way that you intended it to work, but also in the way that people might try it. And at the moment, it still works without something in my inventory, without something in my hands. Fortunately, this remove current actually returns either true or false. True if what we've just removed existed, as in we were holding something. So let's store that in a had fuel equals, and then if had fuel then, and put all of this in our if statement, end. So now we're going remove the thing that the player's holding and store the result of that in our had fuel variable, which is a local variable, which means it only exists in this function here in this chunk of code. So remove the item from their inventory, store the result of that in had fuel. If there was a result, then run the code which starts all the effects, and then that's it. So let's have a look at what that, oh, didn't save it. You can tell if you saved because of that little asterisk up there. So Control S to save, return to the game. So now if I run over here, I'm interacting with the fire and it doesn't work. Let's just check that it still works if I throw something on it. Got my duck. And the duck goes on the fire and the fire starts. Here we go. Okay, so that's the starting the fire mechanic. Let's have a look now at how we go about stopping the fire. So we said at the beginning that we were going to make it so that you interact with the fire and it starts burning. When it runs out of fuel, or it feels like it's run out of fuel, then it stops burning. So to do that, we need an amount of time, or a length that this item of fuel gives us, or some kind of number. We need a number. So the number is going to be called duration. I guess that's a little bit max duration. And the type is a number. And I'm putting it as a property because I might want to change it really easily. So now I've saved this, and now I've got this max duration here. Oh no, I'm going to call it burn rate. And then I'm going to call it burn rate. And this is how much fuel this fire burns per second. Okay. So I've got a burn rate, which is just an arbitrary number. And in order to count that down, oh, I need some fuel. Yeah, so I've got a burn rate and I need a fuel. So self dot, and the fuel doesn't, yeah, we need a max fuel. Name is max fuel, type equals number. Okay, and I'm just going to set max fuel to 1. And so gradually, and burn rate is going to be 0.1. Actually, it's going to be 0.05. Yeah. And so every second, 0.05 of our fuel gets removed. So 1 divided by 0.05 is 20. So the fire will last for 20 seconds. If it was 0.1, 1 divided by 0.1 is 10. So the fire will last for 10 seconds from giving it fuel till it runs out. So 10-second fire. Yeah, burn rate and max fuel is a good way to do it. So when we feed it some fuel in our add fuel function here, which is here, we should set our current fuel to the max fuel. So let's create a little current fuel. Current fuel equals 0. Let's create a little variable that exists. It's not property level, so we can't access it from the entity editor, but it exists as a part of Fire script, so we can access it from wherever. Self.currentFuel equals 0. When we add fuel, if had fuel, not only do we start all of these crazy effects, but we also self.currentFuel, we make our current fuel equal to self.properties.maxFuel. So we now have fuel on our fire, and numerically we have fuel on our fire. Before we had like visual effects fuel on our fire, but now we've got a numerical model which is pretending to be a fire, just like using maths behind the scenes rather than actually burning something with a webcam or something. I don't know. So function, let's add a tick event which just reduces the amount of fuel we have on our fire. Function fire script on tick delta time. And if I just do that again, delta time, I do the bracket again, you can see that the on tick event, you can just call it without anything in the brackets, but like we captured the player here, because this was run on an on interact event from our game, we can actually capture the amount of time in seconds that has passed since the last time tick was called, and that's called delta time. And you'll see that come up if you do lots of these types of things. Delta time you'll see come up quite a lot. So we can capture the amount of time since the last tick event occurred in delta time, and then we just reduce our current fuel times we reduce our current fuel by delta time times burn rate. So self.currentFuel equals delta time times self.properties.burn rate. So now we're reducing our fuel, and let's print current fuel so we can see that it's doing something. Self.currentFuel, like that. Save that, and let's just see that in action. So generate an item here. Oh, it's an AK, or it's an assault rifle. And then interact with the fire. So throw the assault rifle on the fire, and now it's going, and we can see that our current fuel, I didn't remove it. So this is just the burn rate times delta time. So that's not helpful. It needs to be self.currentFuel minus delta time times burn rate. There we go. So this should be 1 when we add some fuel, and then it counts down. There we go. Okay, so you'll see it count down constantly. So we're in negative numbers, and we'll fix that in a minute. But let's just generate our object. and it's an assault rifle again, and then interact with the fire. And you'll see it's gone up to 1. So we've gone up to our max fuel, and then gradually the fuel is running down. Okay, so numerically our fire is doing something now. It's jumping up to 1 when we throw some fuel on it, and then it counts down. But it counts down past 0 and it doesn't stop. And so logically it's doing something, but we need to finish that logic now. So we should only be counting down if self.current fuel is greater than 0. That's the only time we should be removing fuel. Okay. And if once we've removed some fuel, if self.current fuel is now less than 0, then we need to stop the fire. Self stop fire. Like that. So we remove, if the current fuel we have, we've got more than 0. If we've got 0 fuel or less, then we don't have any fuel and the fire shouldn't be burning. If we've got more than that, then we can assume after this point the fire is burning. So we need to reduce our fuel, and that's the algorithm to do that bit. If our fuel gets below 0, then the fire should burn out. We run out of fuel and it should stop. And that's why it was really handy to do this stop fire function earlier. Okay. There we go. So let's just save that and test it. So now our current fuel never goes below 0, or well, it doesn't. It stops once it gets to past 0. Let's get an object. Got a sunflower. So pick up the sunflower, and then let's put it on the fire. Okay, and now the fire is burning very quickly. Sunflower's burning very, very quickly. And it's burnt out. Notice that it's gone past 0, but that doesn't actually matter because we used less than rather than equal to. So because we use less than, it doesn't matter. So now I can go and get another item from the loot box or the luck machine. Sandwich. Ah, my sandwich doesn't work. That's okay. Let's just generate something else. Oh, an axe. Okay, so I've got an axe. Let's burn that. There we go. And that's essentially the core of it. Now, if we wanted to, we can add some more things to this. So at the start, I mentioned that I wanted to make sure that this was useful beyond just putting things on a fire and then it running out. So let's create a couple of events here. This one's going to be called on fire started, and the type is going to be an event. And let's create another event called on fire stopped, and the type will be an event. If I save that, let's click on the fire and go to where these are. So now I've got these two events, and they kind of work like the on interact event would work, or whatever. So we can hook into other things. Maybe, for example, if I go to my industrial bellows, I've got this active animation script on there, which just means that I can call an activate function, which runs an animation on those bellows. So on my fire, let's go to the fire, and let's go to those industrial bellows. So on fire started, click the plus, and let's put the industrial bellows in there. The active animation script is what I want, and then activate, which will run this function here and essentially play a looping animation of active. When the fire stops, let's drag the bellows onto that one and deactivate. So I'm just using it to add more visual flourishes to my experience. You could also use these events to engage with your game controller in some way. So I don't know, if it was a team-based game and you had to keep your fire alive, maybe when one of the team's fire runs out, it calls the game controller, team loses, red team or whatever. And yeah, so you could hook it up to kind of whatever function in whatever script you want to use. Maybe when the fire starts, the luck machine is capable of being used. So I'll get this lovely bit of wood here and put that in the fire. And now, only did half the code. Okay, so that didn't work, but it's because when I add fuel, I should, okay, so I've got these two events. Now we need to actually fire them. So I haven't broken the game. Tested that, hasn't broken by adding those two properties. Let's now check if we need to, before we set the current fuel to the max fuel, let's check if there was fuel. If self.current fuel is less than or equal to 0, then. And if it's less than or equal to 0, and then we're setting it to the max fuel, means we're starting the fire. So we're not just topping it up. So this is where we have our self.properties.start on fire started send open close brackets. So at this point, so we know at this point we've got fuel and we've interacted with the fire and we want to throw the fuel on the fire. Then we get to this point and we're saying, was the fire going before? Was there fuel in the fire? And if there wasn't, less than or equal to 0, then we can send out our fire started event, and we can do lots of things with that, whatever we want to do. And the same with the stop fire, except we know that this function stops the fire. So we don't need to check whether anything exists here. All we need to do is self.properties.onFireStopped send. So we've hooked up those two events. We've hooked up the started event and the stopped event. And we already added the industrial bellows animations to those two things. So let's try that again. Let's generate an object. A lovely flower. Let's put the flower on the fire. And now the bellows are working. And if we open up our... Oh yeah, we removed the print statement. So a good idea would be to hook in that value into a bit of UI somewhere, either on the player's screen or in the game world somewhere. Give the player some indication that the fire is running low. And you'll notice that the bellows have stopped once the fire has stopped. And so that kind of brings us to the end of this tutorial, where we looked at starting a fire by throwing something from our inventory in a hole. Starts a fire, chimney smoke, bit of animation. Could do lots more things with the animation and integrate that with our game in some way to make it a core part of our game mechanic. And hopefully that's been interesting and useful. Let me know what you think. If you have any feedback about the tutorials, I'm always open to engaging with the feedback to make them better. If there's a tutorial you would like to see on a specific subject, then please get in touch on the Discord. You can go to the Ask Anything or to the Crayta General channels and ask away in there. Yeah, and I really look forward to seeing some more furnaces in the game world. Furnaces are really fun to make and yeah, good fun to program too. I hope this has been useful and I look forward to seeing you in Crayta.